Today's apologists claim the atheists' demand for evidence is unreasonable. Astronomer Carl Sagan popularized the term, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." It's a phrase often used by those who value critical thinking, skepticism, and the scientific method. Basically, it means that mundane claims may be generally accepted without skepticism, but highly unusual or unlikely claims are going to need to be demonstrated. Religious apologists often bristle at the extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence standard, particularly when it's used by atheists in response to claims for the existence of God. They'll often quote the Bible, refer to personal testimonies, point to arguments from design or fine-tuning, and so on, thinking these arguments provide sufficient evidence for believing in God. The problem is, these aren't evidence, they're claims. And claims need to be supported by evidence, or else they can be dismissed without evidence. The more outlandish the claim, the stronger the evidence should be to justify belief. Here's an example to illustrate the point. My wife enjoys taking long walks through the farms and forests where we live in Germany. If, after a walk, she were to claim she saw a cow, I would believe her. After all, I often see cows myself when I walk through the same regions. Nothing unusual there. If, however, she said she saw a wolf, I would have to be somewhat skeptical because there aren't supposed to be any wolf populations in this area. Although it's not entirely inconceivable that a wolf could have surreptitiously traveled to this region, I would suspect my wife just saw a large dog. I would probably need at least a credible photograph to be convinced. So, what if she said she saw an African elephant wandering through the forest? I'm sorry, but her word alone wouldn't suffice. Sure, she has a track record of always being open and honest with me, but an elephant is an extraordinary claim. Not an impossible one, mind you, but really quite extraordinary, since there isn't any African zoo or animal park anywhere near here. I would suspect I was being pranked and would check the date to make sure it wasn't the 1st of April. For me to believe she saw an actual elephant, I would need to go check out the area, search for footprints and droppings, and try to see the elephant for myself. Independent news reports of an escaped elephant in the area could also be convincing. Unless it's April 1st, of course. But then what if my wife claimed she saw a huge fire-breathing dragon toasting marshmallows with a centaur and a yeti? How extraordinary is that? I would be far more likely to believe she had been the victim of some sort of hoax, suffered a hallucination, or was outright lying than that she actually saw a dragon, a centaur, and a yeti. After all, I've yet to see any credible evidence to even suggest such mythical creatures exist, but people misinterpret, hallucinate, and deceive all the time all over the world. So seeing the remains of a campfire and leftover marshmallows wouldn't do a thing to convince me that the claim was real. Not even video of the event would do it, since that could be created with CGI. No, I would need to personally see and closely examine the dragon, centaur, and yeti to become convinced they were real. And I'd want the scientific community to examine them as well. We would all need extraordinary evidence, and we would be idiots to do otherwise. Now, if my wife were to go one step further and claim I couldn't examine these 3 mythical creatures because they were invisible, supernatural beings of pure spirit who would torture me for all eternity if I didn't believe they exist, well, now we're getting into truly batshit crazy territory. The evidence for such an extraordinary claim would have to be extremely extraordinary for me to believe it. But at this point the claim would be unfalsifiable and therefore impossible to demonstrate with evidence. Yet that is exactly the level of crazy that religious apologists are claiming is true. They're asking people to believe in an extraordinary claim without providing extraordinary evidence. And, in fact, they've made the claim unfalsifiable and thus impossible to demonstrate with evidence, so there's no way to even find out if the claim is false. Finally, in regard to supernatural claims, we should never assume a supernatural explanation over a natural one, even if we have no idea what the explanation is. For example, if you discover that your dog that lives in a fenced-in backyard has disappeared, it makes sense to look for the simplest, natural explanation first. Perhaps someone left the gate open, or part of the fence has come loose, or the dog dug a hole under the fence. If it's none of those, then maybe someone closed the gate after the dog escaped, or even that someone stole your dog. But if a thorough investigation turns up nothing, the only rational conclusion would be that you don't know. Period. What is not justified is concluding something extraordinary, like an alien abduction or that angels carried him up to heaven. In both those cases, you would need to have extraordinary evidence to justify belief. But the supernatural explanation would require immensely more evidence. Why is that? Because every time we have discovered an explanation for a phenomenon that was previously believed to be supernatural, the explanation has always turned out to be natural. Never once has a presumed natural explanation ever turned out to be supernatural. So a natural explanation, even an improbable one, is historically much more likely to be true than any supernatural explanation. So that's why extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Anything less than that is an exercise in extraordinary gullibility.